In the spring of 1940, the 400,000 Jews living in Warsaw and surrounding areas were ordered to move into the Jewish section of Warsaw under penalty of death. The crowding and food shortages were unbearable. Typhus became epidemic. During the first year, an estimated 100,000 people died of hunger and disease. The gate, that's a Jewish policeman, and note the mode of transportation was generally the rickshaws. Despite the grave hardships, life in the Warsaw Ghetto was rich with educational and cultural activities conducted by its underground organizations. Hospitals, public soup kitchens, orphanages, refugee centers, libraries, and recreation facilities were formed, as well as rudimentary schools and even a symphony orchestra. A semblance of order and food distribution was maintained by the Jewish Council, but they were responsible for providing the basic social necessities such as fire protection, police, and medical responders. The Nazi authorities promulgated a number of decrees, and again, the penalty for violation was death. Forbidden items included radios, which could provide us news from the BBC about German defeats and some hope that our freedom was near. Another forbidden item was fur, because all the furs had to be turned over to the German army, which was freezing on the Russian front. We comforted one another with the refrain, "Never again." It was an article of faith that our sacrifice would matter, that the world would never allow such atrocities to be perpetrated again. In 1942, the Nazis began implementation of Operation Reinhard, which to us is better known as the Final Solution. Between July and September, they dragged between 250,000 and 300,000 Jews from their apartments to the infamous Umschlagplatz, where they were packed in cattle cars for a 2-hour trip to the Treblinka extermination camp. This is their housing as they were awaiting death. This was the gas chamber. Notice the Star of David on top to make it look like a synagogue. These were the suitcases. The glass eyeglasses, shoes, and hair. Piles of silent testimonials to living sentient beings who were no longer there. So when several thousand German troops, supported by heavy tanks, returned to the ghetto on April 19th, 1943, to wipe out the remaining 50,000 survivors, they were met with fierce resistance, and that was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising that lasted 4 weeks. On May 16th, after leveling every building in the ghetto and dispatching the remaining 50,000 survivors to Treblinka and other death camps, General Jürgen Stroop reported to Hitler that the Warsaw Ghetto was no more. So once my life was no longer in danger, the survivor's guilt set in. The question I kept asking myself were, why was I spared when so many good people were not? And how can I repay my debt to society? The obvious answer was to make this earth a better place to live for all its inhabitants by reducing the preponderance of evil and oppression. But how? So upon graduation, I immigrated to Israel for 2 years and launched a national organization for religious freedom in Israel. As you may know, Israel is ruled by the Orthodox order, and at least at that time, Reform and conservative Jews were not allowed to carry out any of the civil functions, marriages, divorces, and conversions. And so that's basically what we were trying to achieve, is break some of the stranglehold of the orthodoxy on Israel's civil activities. Upon returning to the U.S. in 1963, I became involved in the humanist and environmental movement, still trying to find a meaning in my life. Then in the early 1970s, I visited a slaughterhouse. They wouldn't let me onto the kill floor, but I got to visit the storage areas. And I saw piles of hooves and skins and hearts, livers and skulls, bearing silent testimony to the living, sentient, feeling beings who were no more. It was an unreal déjà vu all over again. I tried to reject it as a coincidence, but the parallels with my memories of Treblinka were overwhelming. The use of cattle cars to transport my family to their deaths, the crowded housing in wood crates, the deception, the piling of bodies in pits, and the emotional detachment of the perpetrators. Then I saw the quote by my literary hero, a 1973 Nobel laureate in literature, Isaac Bashevis Singer, and a dreaded comparison started making perfect sense. To the animals, all people are Nazis. To the animals, all life is an eternal Treblinka. I realized at that point that the Nazis, as much as unpopular a notion as this may be, that the Nazis were made of the same DNA as their grandfathers, who produced such musical, literary, and scientific geniuses as Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, Bruch, Einstein, Goethe, Handel, Kant, Mendelssohn, Mozart, Röntgen, Schiller, Schumann, Schweitzer, Strauss, Telemann, the same DNA as their grandchildren, who have formed one of the most admired and caring nations on earth. So what was the difference? The difference was that they had 6 years of very thorough and compelling brainwashing by some very capable and some very evil people. Their training was narrowly focused on dehumanizing, objectifying, and annihilating Jews. Could such massive brainwashing of an entire society be inflicted on other societies? Certainly not on ours. Or could it? Kill, pet. Kill, pet. What do we do now? My friend Melanie Joy actually had to write a book to explain our dysfunction when it comes to animals. But they are only animals. Is that all? Do we not share with them a love of life and the ability to experience many emotions, including affection, joy, sadness, and fear? Do we not treat them as beloved members of our family? And how many of you would rather spend $1,000 saving the life of a human Ebola victim in Liberia than the life of your family dog who needed an urgent operation? My friends, the oppressive mindset is not about the victims, be they animals, Bosnians, Tutsis, Cambodian victims of Pol Pot, or European Jews. It's about us. Never again should not be about what others shouldn't do to us. It should be about what we should not do to others. Never again means that we must never again perpetrate mass atrocities against other living, sentient beings. Yet, the seeds of oppression are everywhere around us, starting with a preteen school bully. We did not end evil by winning World War II. Consigning evil to one nation or one group is a dangerous proposition that can throw us off our guard in stamping out oppression wherever it raises its ugly head.